Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. The time has come and we will be learning the best pattern that's out there, the composition root that exists in dependency injection. So we would kind of have a recap of everything that we learned earlier in layer of understanding why the composition root gives you so many flexibilities, why it is so powerful, and how can you actually use it in your day-to-day work. Well, we'll be using the same example from service locator anti-pattern. So again, profile view controller, you tap on logout, you go to the logout view controller, you can tap yes, and then it would simulate logout with 1 second delay, and then you go to the initial screen, and from initial screen we can go to the profile screen, and the cycle repeats. So we have recursive navigation, let's say. So if we go into code and try to understand, as a recap, right, what's going on there, we have a profile view controller. It loads avatar and user data. Whenever we tap on logout button, it would create the next view controller and then push next view controller to the stack. So logout view controller almost does the same thing. Whenever we tap logout, it would simulate 1 second delay request for logging out, and then it would create the next view controller, and then it would show the initial view controller. So initial view controller, whenever we select, go to profile, it would create the profile view controller and set it in the navigation stack. So to clearly understand the picture, we better draw some diagrams. So let's start with the profile view controller. So profile view controller directly creates bundled avatar image loader. It also creates fake user loader, and it also creates logout VC view controller, let's say. So it's in a different color because let's say it's a different screen, it's a different feature, that's why. So it directly creates bundled avatar image loader, and it directly creates fake user loader. It also creates logout view controller. So we also covered them accordingly to see from where arrows go to which component. So logout view controller in turn creates the simulated logout service. So it simulates the logging out action, let's say. And then it also creates initial view controller. Okay. And then initial view controller creates the profile view controller, right? So this is the kind of a simplified diagram right now, but it tells us a lot because profile view controller has so many dependencies, and since it creates logout view controller, it also has dependency on simulated logout service, which is implicit right now because logout view controller creates its own dependency. So as you remember, we should always strive to inject dependencies via initializer injection if that's not possible via use of property injection. So let's try doing it, and then we would change the diagram accordingly. So let's start with a profile view controller. So profile view controller needs these dependencies, right? So since we are injecting avatar loader and user loader, the thing is that we also need an instance of the logout view controller. But the problem here is that the view controller knows that it is in the context of navigation stack. So this is somewhat a bit off from the topic of composition root, but like it's more of a in a sense that view controller is doing a lot. Like it has to deal with navigation, and it has to render views, it has to load some data from the remote API, let's say, or like from remote service. So instead of creating the view controller directly and then pushing it, we would actually inject a closure so that someone else who creates the profile view controller would take care of pushing something to the navigation stack. So we're not injecting instance of logout view controller because then profile view controller would be coupled with the concept of navigation stack. Let's say, what if we had a scenario where we would want to show ProfileViewController modally, then this code won't work. So as to get rid of this concept of navigation from view controllers, we would lift it up one level above where they are created. So let me inject a closure like show logout VC, let's say. It would be a simple closure, escaping closure, so that we could capture the instance of it. Yeah, so we are done with creating the initializer and properties, so let's use them. Awesome. Right now we've eliminated need for concrete types, and then we are directly referencing only protocols, which are interfaces. So let's see the change diagram. So ProfileViewController would not have reference to bundled avatar image loader, but it would have reference to avatar image loader. And it would not have reference to the fake user loader, but it would directly reference user loader. But as you can see, we've eliminated dependency from ProfileViewController to LogoutViewController. And the reason for that is that it is not created directly, but it simply holds a closure. Let's say show logout VC. This is a closure. And the closure is also somewhat a polymorphic interface, meaning that you can inject a different implementation of the closure unless it satisfies the contract. Like it actually has the basic closure signature. So we've eliminated the dependency from ProfileViewController to the LogoutViewController, and it would be much easier for us to reuse it because it doesn't reference any other feature. So let's say we wanted to change the order of showing screens. So it would be like pretty much easier for us. But we've broken initial view controller right now because the code doesn't compile. So initial view controller requires some, whenever we are creating it, it requires us to pass dependencies. But remember, dependencies should not get the dependencies of data dependencies, which is like control frequency pattern. And instead of, again, creating the next view controller and then pushing to the stack, we would just inject the closure, show profile VC, which would be just closure void to void. And then we would just use the closure instead of doing all of this jazz. So let's see how the diagram has changed. So remember that initial view controller was creating profile view controller directly, and since it was creating it, it would immediately have dependency on avatar image loader, user loader, and then on the closure as well. But like we're not willing to have this complexity in just a simple screen, right? So we've eliminated this arrow coming from initial view controller to profile view controller, and it just has its own dependency, which is show profile VC. Awesome. So right now, diagram looks something like this. And the only place that's left is like logout view controller, right? Since it creates initial view controller, it has to pass a closure to show the next screen. But like we would take the same idea and decouple logout view controller from the initial view controller. So logout view controller creates the simulated logout service and pushes next view controller, which is like initial view controller. So let's do the same dance. So yeah, we've lifted our dependencies up and let's use them. So we are using logout service, and then instead of doing this one, we would just invoke the closure directly. So let's see how the diagram has changed again. So logout view controller does not hold a reference to simulated logout service, which is a concrete type. So it would have a reference to the logout service, which is an abstract type. And we've eliminated this arrow coming from logout view controller to initial view controller, and now we have it has its own dependency, which is a closure. So as you can see, features are standalone. They do not depend on each other. They do not depend on dependencies of their adjacent screens, let's say, and it's very easy to move them around. Let's say if I just like working in a diagram, I can easily move two boxes together and they do not drag any other arrow going from this screen to other screen. And like I can easily choose logout and then move it as well because it's standalone. So the question comes is that if logout view controller does not create the next view controller, it doesn't create its own service, and the profile view controller doesn't do all of that jazz, and initial view controller also doesn't do all of that jazz. So who should do it actually? So the answer is that it's the responsibility of the composition root to create the entire object graph, link pieces together, and let things work. So let's go to the scene delegate. So obviously scene delegate could be considered as part of the composition root. So let's create a profile VC. So it needs an avatar loader, it needs show logout VC, needs all of that stuff. So let's, since ProfileViewController requires avatar image loader, we can now pass out bundled avatar image loader. For the user loader, it would be fake user loader. For show logout VC, it would be creation of logout VC, which is logout view controller. For logout service, we would inject simulated logout service. For show initial VC, we would inject initial VC, which is initial view controller. For the show profile VC, however, we need to keep the same dance. As you can see, it's very recursive, right? So let me create a method to create profile view controller. So start profile VC would actually trigger like the first screen. So let me copy this one. And then since we've copied it here, let's indent it a little bit. And then we need an instance of navigation controller, right, to push this thing into the stack. So let's hold a reference to the navigation controller. So then we would push profile VC to the stack. But as you can see, show logout VC requires logout view controller, and it requires also initial view controller, which is a closure, and initial view controller also requires a closure. So let me create a method to start logout VC. I've created the start logout VC method, and then let me just move all of this into this method. So start logout VC would create the logout view controller and then would push it to the navigation stack, which is animated, right? But remember again, show initial VC requires initial view controller. So I've created start initial VC method to start the initial view controller. So let me copy this line 37 here. And then as you can see, show profile VC requires a closure. So what kind of closure should we pass? So it should start again from the beginning, right? So we need to pass the start profile VC method. That's it. And then we should use navigation controller, set view controllers to be initial VC, animated true. Awesome. And coming back to start profile VC, whenever we tap on show logout, we need to start the logout VC, right? So inject the closure, which is this method right there. And we would push the profile VC to the stack, and then it would show the logout VC, right? So logout VC also needs initial VC method. So let's inject again the closure. Let me indent it for clarity. And whenever we tap on logout, if we tap on logging out, it would show the initial VC, it would set the view controller so that we cannot go back. And then whenever we tap on go to profile, it would actually trigger this method. So as you can see, it's very recursive, and the only part which is broken is this one. So let me use it as like navigation controller to be the root view controller. We'd make key invisible, and then we would start the profile VC. So awesome. We've changed just the composition. As you can see, scene delegate is part of the composition root. It doesn't have to be here, like scene delegate doesn't have to do all of the navigation stuff. Commonly in iOS, people tend to use things like coordinators, flow, routers. So you can create a router coordinator, whatever you wish to call it, and just keep that logic there. But like for simplicity for this video, I'm keeping everything in the scene delegate. So let's see how the diagram has changed. So scene delegate, let's represent it as a different color, is the entry point of our app, right? Is a part of the entry point of our app. So it can actually go and reference ProfileViewController. It can also reference LogoutViewController. It can also reference InitialViewController, right? And let me move these a bit for clarity. And since the scene delegate references everything, it would be easy for us, like for it to reference user loader, any concrete user loader. It would also reference the disclosure. It would also reference the bundled avatar image loader. And it would also reference logout service, disclosure, and last closure. So scene delegate is actually a glue that pieces everything together. As you can see, there are so many arrows going from scene delegate to all of the components that exist in this example. So this is actually the critical part, because scene delegate has to reference everything because it composes the entire object graph, and it's very easy to see it on a diagram. In code, it's not that large class, right? It just like has like bunch of like 3 methods. It creates profile VC, it references bundled avatar image loader, fake user loader. It also injects the closure to start the logout VC. It creates the logout view controller, it creates the simulated logout service, and then it starts the initial VC. Then in the start initial VC, it would create the view controller, inject the closure, and set the view controller via navigation controller. So the thing is that it would be very easy for us to replace the fake user loader with another one if we ever decide to use like core data implementation, raw implementation, or like Alamifier implementation that would actually hit the backend to get the data for us. So let's try to run the app and see if it builds. Oh, seems out that I actually forgotten to invoke the show logout VC closure. So let's do it. Yeah, app works as usual. Tapping on logout would go to the next screen. We can tap back, go back again, tap yes. It would show the profile, and then tapping on profile would actually go here as well. But the only bug here is that it has a bug button, and we can go to show profile, but we should never have that button. So we need to set view controllers, right? And let's make it animated as true. Logout, yes. Profile, awesome. It is working exactly the same as we had earlier. So this is actually the pattern that I've never seen in the code bases that I worked. And this is actually the most important pattern. So you can be using constructor injection, property injection, method injection. You might be using interfaces, protocols, and not referencing concrete types. You might not be using containers, not getting trapped into global mutable state or whatever. But if you do not have a centralized place for creating the entire object graph, everything you are doing is meaningless, because then you still have to couple one screen to other screen, or you have to couple service to another service. You have to couple components somehow. But if you defer everything to whoever creates those components, like a scene delegate in our case, then you are actually unleashing the power of the entire dependency injection concept in general. So that's all for this video, and I hope you like it, because I tried to piece everything together if all of the previous videos made no sense for you, I hope it does make sense for right now, because it clearly indicates how you can decouple screens, features, modules, components from each other and compose everything in a centralized place. And remember that composition root cannot be reused. It's always one per app, or like per project, let's say. So if you had like some other project, you would actually use it differently. But the key thing here is that we can actually reuse ProfileViewController. Let's say we could have shown it modally, and it would be very easy for us just by just going like and using present API of the view controller. So thanks a lot for watching, and make sure to leave any comments if you have, or if anything was not that clear. Thanks.